Okay, anybody, how are you? Anybody not get the copy of the outline for the series, for the study tonight? Anyone not get one of these? Raise your hands. All right, just keep your hands up and I'll get those outlines passed out to you. We'll be doing 4 studies over these next 4 Thursdays, and tonight we're going to deal with the topic, the sequence of pre-tribulation events, dealing with a series of events that will happen before the tribulation can start. Next week we'll discuss the question about the rapture, dealing with the content of the rapture and the timing of it. On the 3rd Thursday we'll study the modern state of Israel in Bible prophecy. And the final Thursday we'll deal with Israel's final restoration. So that'll be the 4 specific topics I want to cover in these sessions. As Pastor mentioned, we will have at the end of each session a question and answer session. Your questions do not need to be limited to what we've covered. You're welcome to ask questions in other areas of biblical studies. If you ask me a question I'll be dealing with in a subsequent Thursday, I'll ask you to wait till then to get your answer, but otherwise there are no limitations. You're welcome to ask your questions from the floor. You're welcome to write your questions down and leave them here on the podium, or give them to somebody to pass it forward, and that will be fine. Look at your outline. You will notice that there was 2 segments of pre-trib events. First of all, those we can put in chronological sequence. And then there's the second category of events that simply the Bible teaches will happen sometime before the tribulation starts. We don't have enough information about these events to be able to fit in their sequential order. And so we'll be trying to cover these in these 2 categories. And so we'll begin with the first one, and turn your Bibles now to Matthew chapter 24. In Matthew chapter 23, the Messiah closed his public ministry with a massive renunciation of the spiritual leaders of Israel of that day. And while he deals with several different of the sins, the 7 woes he pronounces upon them form a circle, because the first woe and the 7th woe deal with the same sin, in that they are guilty of leading the people astray in rejecting his messianic claims. He closes his renunciation with a lament in verses 37 through 39 of chapter 23. And he points out in verse 37 that he longed to spread out his hands and give the holy city the messianic protection that was predicted by the prophets, but they willed it not when they rejected him. So in verse 38, the house, the temple, will soon lie desolate. But notice what he says in verse 39, "For I say unto you, you shall not see me henceforth till ye shall say, Blessed is he that comes in the name of the Lord." Now, from a Jewish frame of reference of the 1st century Judaism, that was an official messianic greeting. Rabbis were teaching whenever the Messiah comes, he must be welcomed with these words, "Blessed is he that comes in the name of the Lord." What he does in verse 38 is set down the precondition to the second coming, in that he will not come back until the Jewish people ask him to come back, and Israel's national salvation is the one prerequisite to the second coming. And that's one of those differences between the rapture, which we'll discuss next week, and the second coming. The rapture has no preconditions, can happen any moment of time, and that's God's program for the church, the body, the Messiah. But the second coming is part of God's program for Israel. And it has this one key precondition, Israel's national salvation. And now in chapter 24, verses 1 and 2, as they leave the temple compound, the disciples point out to the Messiah the magnificent stones that made up the temple compound. But he prophesies at the end of verse 2, "There shall not be left here one stone upon another that shall not be thrown down." And this statement about the future destruction of Jerusalem led to the 3 questions raised in verse 3. Number 1, tell us, when shall these things be? These things refers to a statement about the coming destruction of the city and the temple. What is the sign that these things are about to come to pass? Second question, what is the sign of your coming? And thirdly, what is the sign of the end of the age? As the third question, we're concerned about at this moment of time, what is the end of the sign that has begun the end of this age? And they come from their Jewish perspective, which the rabbis saw two different periods of time, this age and the age to come. This age is the age in which we now live. The age to come will be the Messianic age, the Messianic kingdom. And so the question is, what is the sign that this age, which we now live, has begun to end? What's the sign that will trigger the last days of this age? And that will in turn eventually lead to the age to come, the Messianic kingdom. And what concerns us right now is his answer to this third question. And what he does is answer the question in two ways. First of all, negatively, he points out two things which are not a sign of the last days, and then the one sign that is the trigger for the last days of this age. So verse 4, Jesus answers unto them, take heed that no man lead you astray, for many shall come in my name, saying, I am the Christ, shall lead many astray. You shall hear wars and rumors of wars. See that ye be not troubled, for these things must needs come to pass, but the end is not yet. And so he gives them two things that will characterize the entire church age period, but neither of these two things is a sign of the last days. And the first of these is the rise of many false messiahs. In Jewish history, the first one to claim to be the Messiah was Jesus of Nazareth. Beginning a century later, there were many false prophets. The first one was a man named Simon Bar Kokhba, or Simon Bar Kokhba, who led the second Jewish revolt against Rome. And between him and the last one was Jacob Frank in the late 1700s, there were many other false messiahs in Jewish history. And many of them, like Shabtai Tzvi, had a huge, large following. Also in Gentile circles, there's also the rise of many false messiahs. The most recent one was Reverend Moon, who claimed to be the second coming. As all false messiahs, eventually Reverend Moon underwent his own lunar eclipse and disappeared from the scene. But the rise of false messiahs here or there by itself is not a sign of the last days. This will characterize the whole church age history. Secondly, you shall hear wars and rumors of wars, and this refers to local wars here, local wars there. That will characterize the entire church age. It's not a sign of the last days. And people often think if there's a war in the Middle East, it must be prophetically significant. That's not necessarily so. And when the first Gulf War broke out, many books came out printed trying to prove that this fulfills some kind of prophecy, but the fact is there was no prophecy of any war between Iraq and the USA. And eventually when that war came to an end, nothing significant happened. Books were not written, thank God, for the second Gulf War. They learned the lesson. But now there's all kinds of speculations about the blood moons and so on, but these are not the signs of the last days. Notice what he says about these two things concerning false prophets and rumors of wars and local wars. He says these things must need come to pass, but the end is not yet. It's not a sign the last days have begun. He then provides the answer positively in verse 7. For nation shall rise up against nation, kingdom against kingdom. There shall be famines, earthquakes in divers places. All these things are the beginning of travail. The word travail means birth pang. It refers to the series of birth pains a woman undergoes before giving birth to a child. He's not dealing with general birth pangs here. Notice this is the beginnings of the birth pang. This is the first birth pang. And the first birth pang is when you see nation against nation, kingdom against kingdom. And that is somehow different than wars and rumors of wars. Wars and rumors of wars was not a sign of the last days, but nation against nation, kingdom against kingdom is a sign of the last days. And therefore, this would be the trigger of the beginning of the end. And the question now is, what does the term nation against nation, kingdom against kingdom refer to? In the first century Judaism, this was part of Jewish eschatology, Jewish prophetic thinking. It referred to a world war. And the point of the phrase is when you see a world war in contrast to local wars, that's a sign that the last days have begun. Now, how do rabbis derive that? Derive that from certain passages in the Hebrew Bible where the meaning was total warfare in the context of the passage. Total warfare in the context of passage. Keep your finger in Matthew and now look at Isaiah chapter 19. Isaiah chapter 19. The context of Isaiah 19 is the land of Egypt. And it says in verse 1, the burden of Egypt, behold, Jehovah rides upon a swift cloud, comes unto Egypt, and the idols of Egypt shall tremble at his presence. The heart of Egypt shall melt in the midst of it. I will stir up the Egyptians against the Egyptians. They shall fight everyone against his brother, everyone against neighbor, city against city, kingdom against kingdom. Here you will see that idiom being used in the context of Egypt, emphasizing total civil war within the territory of Egypt. And now look at 2 Chronicles chapter 15. Second Chronicles chapter 15, the context here is the nations of the Middle East. It says in chapter 15, verse 3, 2 Chronicles chapter 15, verse 3, now for a long time Israel was without the true God and without a teaching priest and without the law. And when their distress they turned unto Jehovah, the God of Israel, and sought him, he was found of them. In those days and times there was no peace to him that went in and to him that went out. But great vexations were upon all the inhabitants of the land. And they were broken in pieces, nation against nation, city against city. For God they vexed them all adversity. Here the idiom is used again in the context of the nations of the Middle East, emphasizing total warfare among the nations of the Middle East. Going back to Matthew chapter 24, the context within Matthew has to do with a world war. So the idiom would be used for a world war, and by first century Judaism, that was the trigger for the last days of this age. And so I would agree with those who teach that we live in the last days, but the start date was actually 1914 to 1918 with the First World War, followed by the Second World War, which is a continuation of the First World War in 1939 to 1945. And both world wars had a decisive impact on Jewish history. And keep in mind, we know where we are in the realm of prophecy, not the way world events affect the USA or American history, but it affects Jewish history and the history of Israel. And the First World War gave the impetus to growth of Zionism, and the events of the Second World War, the Holocaust, is what created the world situation for the reestablishment of the State of Israel. And that was the event that finally triggered the end days, but it's a lengthy period of time. That should outline the second event has to do with the reestablishment of Israel. I'm not going to dwell on this because a study 2 weeks from now will be on the modern Jewish state of Israel in Bible prophecy, so we're going to devote that whole study on 2 weeks from today on that point. Let me just point out this for now. The Bible describes two different worldwide regatherings of the Jewish people. First of all, there is a worldwide regathering in unbelief in preparation for judgment, and specifically the judgment of the tribulation, and that's what the modern Jewish state fits today. Secondly, there will be a second worldwide regathering in faith in preparation for blessing, the blessings for the kingdom. Now, 2 weeks from tonight, we'll talk about the worldwide regathering in unbelief in preparation for judgment, which is the second event that leads up to tribulation. And then the last Thursday of the month, we shall discuss the second worldwide regathering in faith in preparation for blessing. So I'll come back to this in more detail 2 weeks from today. Let's move on to the next key event that leads up to tribulation, Jerusalem under Jewish control. And turn now to Daniel chapter 9. Daniel chapter 9. What I want to do is read 4 passages in sequence, and I'll make my comments about these passages. First passage is Daniel chapter 9, verse 27. He shall make a firm covenant with many for 1 7. In the middle of the 7, he will cause the sacrifice and the oblation to cease. And upon the wing of abomination shall come one who makes desolate, and even to the full end, and that determined shall wrath be put out upon the desolate. Second passage will be Matthew chapter 24. Matthew chapter 24, verse 15. Matthew 24, verse 15. When therefore you see the abomination of desolation, which was spoken of through Daniel the prophet standing in the holy place, let the reader understand, let them in Judea flee unto the mountains, and so on. One question I often get in these days, of the last 6 years in fact, is our president possibly the Antichrist? Our response has been he may fulfill the prophecy of verse 15 about the Obama nation of desolation. Some of you are a bit slow on that one. But no, he's not the Antichrist as such. Third passage will be 2 Thessalonians chapter 2. Second Thess chapter 2 and verse 3, 2 Thess 2, verse 3. Let no man beguile you in any wise, for it will not be, except the falling away come first, and the man of sin be revealed, the son of perdition. He who opposes and exalts himself against all that is called God or that is worshipped, so that he sits in the temple of God, setting himself forth as God. And the fourth passage would be Revelation chapter 11. Revelation chapter 11. Verse 1, Revelation 11, verse 1. There was given me a reed like unto a rod, and one said, Rise and measure the temple of God and the altar and them that worship therein. But the court which is outside the temple, leave it out and measure it not. For it has been given unto the Gentiles, the holy city shall they tread underfoot 42 months. All 4 of these passages we just read speak of the event that will happen at the midpoint of the tribulation, called the abomination of desolation. That's when the Antichrist will break his covenant with Israel, take over the Jewish temple, seat himself in it, proclaim himself to be God Almighty, and call upon the whole world to worship him as God, and to signify their acceptance of his deity by taking the mark of 666. And that'll be a mid-tribulation event. Also, how is that relevant to what we are now studying? First of all, this shows that by the midpoint of the tribulation, the temple is standing and functioning, and therefore must be rebuilt before the midpoint. That leaves us with 2 possible options. It might be rebuilt in the first half of the tribulation. It might even be rebuilt before the tribulation starts. We cannot be more specific than that. What we can be specific is by the midpoint, it has been erected, it's standing, it's functioning. Now, all that presupposes that Israel has sovereignty over the temple compound. That did not happen back in 1948. Israel became a state in 1948, but Jerusalem was split in 2. And the Jewish people got to keep the newer part, the west side. But the biblical Jerusalem was on the east side. It not fell under Jordanian sovereignty for 19 years, from 1948 to 1967. But these prophecies required Jewish sovereignty over the temple compound. And then one of the products of the Six-Day War was that Israel finally then captured East Jerusalem and had sovereignty over the temple compound. So these prophecies required the Israeli sovereignty would not have such a sovereignty, and Israel's control of East Jerusalem is the third step of 9 steps to lead up to the tribulation, and these first 3 steps have already been fulfilled. Now there'll be 6 more I want to deal with, and let's now turn to the next one, Ezekiel chapter 38. The entire context is chapter 38, verse 1 through chapter 39, verse 16, and the Gog and Magog prophecy ends with chapter 39, verse 16. Verse 17 onward moves into a different prophetic time zone. And what he describes is an alliance of nations coming together for the purpose of invading Israel. Now, I won't go through this passage phrase by phrase, verse by verse, because that goes beyond our time limitations. But divide in your outline in sub-specific divisions, and then we shall summarize these divisions as we proceed. And in chapter 38, verses 1 through 6, we answer the question of who is involved. Now, the leader of this confederacy in verse 2 is someone by the name of Gog. Now, Gog is not a name, it is a title of the leader of the land of Magog. Just like Pharaoh is not a name. Pharaoh is the title of the king of Egypt. Tsar is not a name, it's the title of the king of Russia. Kaiser is not a name, it's the title of the king of Germany. The names were different by different individuals. So we don't need to look for a person named Gog, simply Gog is the leader land of Magog, and Magog was the territory between the Black and the Caspian Seas. Right between the Black and the Caspian Seas, which now comprises the southern segments of Russia. He then mentions the prince of Rosh, Meshech, and Tubal. Rosh covers the northern territories of Russia. Meshech was a tribal area. Eventually it gave the origin of the name Moscow. And then Tubal was another territory in the southern parts, but later it gave names to the city of Tobolsk, spelled T-O-B-O-L-S-K. Tobolsk, which is a capital city of Siberia. It's also my hometown, that's where I was born. Nothing to be proud of, but that is where I was born. And so this is a leader that covers what is today the territory of Russia. But other nations are part of the alliance. He mentions, for example, in verse 5, Persia. Persia today is Iran. Cush today is Ethiopia. Put is sometimes translated as Libya, but should be Somalia. Verse 6 mentions Gomer. Gomer would be territories of East Germany moving towards the eastern segments. Togarmah is essentially Armenia. And then he mentions the phrase outer parts of the north. And from Jerusalem, from Israel, the outermost parts of the north is Russia. And if you draw on a map a line from Moscow to Jerusalem, it's almost a straight north-south line. Now, what we should notice about these nations is that some of these are Muslim, some are not Muslim. It's a combination of both Muslim and non-Muslim nations, but none of these Muslim nations in this text are Arab nations. Arab nations will not participate in the invasion. However, there'll be other Muslim nations that are not Arab that will participate. As to where they attack, that's found in verses 7 through 9. And look at verse 8. After many days you shall be visited. Latter years you shall come into the land that is brought back from the sword, gathered out of many peoples upon the mountains of Israel, which have been a continual waste. Was brought forth of the peoples, they shall dwell securely, all of them. And notice the kind of Israel they invade. An Israel that was reconstituted after the people came back from many different countries. It is after cities have been laying waste and desolate for so long, not being rebuilt and reestablished. It's also reestablished by people that were escaping the sword. He's not describing any Israel that ever existed in ancient times. The first time such a state existed is with the present state of Israel since 1948. So ever the different views about the timing of this invasion, one thing should be clear, it could not have occurred before 1948. Now, question number 3 in verses 10 through 16, you have the question, why are they invading? And the focus is mainly on spoils of war. Things like gold and silver, cattle, and so on are simply general terms for the spoils of war. That's a general explanation. It does not specify specifically what the spoils of war are. Here again, people have initiated different guesses, like the wealth of the Dead Sea, maybe they'll find oil supply in Israel and so on. But these are just guesses. We do not know the exact content of the spoil, but one thing is clear. This invasion is occurring because of Russia's own self-interest. Russia's own self-interest. Look at verse 12. Sheba and Dedan and the merchants of Tarshish, all the young lions thereof, shall say unto you, are you come to take the spoil? Have you assembled your company to take the prey, to carry away silver and gold, to take away cattle and goods, to take great spoil? Now, Sheba and Dedan are territories now which comprise certain segments of Saudi Arabia. So notice these Arab areas that will protest the invasion, not join it. Now the question is, what does he mean by Tarshish and the young lions thereof? The phrase the young lions thereof was a Hebrew idiom meaning referring to nations arising of what was just named. Nations arising of what was just named. What was just named happened to be Tarshish. If we could stop there, that might be easy. However, there was more than one Tarshish in the ancient world because the Phoenicians began their merchant trade on the Mediterranean, would travel by sea and establish colonies. And all of these colonies were given the same name, Tarshish. One was on the west coast of Africa, one was in Great Britain, and one was in the south coast of Spain. Now, this refers to one in Africa. The African section never gave birth to new nations. If this refers to England, that will include the nations coming out of England, such as Canada and the USA. But when he uses the word Tarshish elsewhere in his book, and he does use it several times, always refers to the Spanish one. So to be consistent, we have to say Tarshish here would refer to the Spanish one, and therefore the young lions thereof would conclude all of Central and South America, with the exception of Brazil that came from Portugal and not from Spain. And so ultimately these are nations that complain and would object and would be against this invasion, but never go beyond the protest stage. They voice their protest, never go beyond the protest stage. Now the results on the point 4, what and how, chapter 38, verse 17 to chapter 39, verse 6. What these verses show, especially verses 17 to 23, is that the invasion will penetrate Israeli defenses. They will enter the center of the country, obviously heading to capture Jerusalem, the seat of the Israeli government. But it is at that point, after they enter the central part of the country, that God will intervene. And what he describes here are supernatural destructions, using both natural events in a supernatural way, but also fire and brimstone supernaturally. Many will see here a nuclear warfare, but the terminology used here is the terminology used elsewhere. For example, Sodom and Gomorrah. Did anybody drop a nuclear bomb in Sodom and Gomorrah? No, it was a divine judgment directly by God, and what we are seeing here is as a direct divine judgment. Some people see the American Air Force coming in here to save the Jews, but again, that's reading something into the text that is simply not there. And so we should see this as a supernatural event. Now keep in mind, Israel in its width is only 50 miles wide. That's all. If you drop a nuclear bomb, it will kill everybody. But if you read the text, the only ones killed is the members of the invading armies. Only ones who die is the invading armies. And as far as I know, they have not yet been able to invent a nuclear bomb that's marked for Gentiles only. Doesn't exist. It will kill everybody. So only the way this could actually happen is specifically by supernatural means. So it becomes evident to the whole world that this is something only God can do, and no nation can take credit for what happens. Then moving on to chapter 39, if you're using a King James Version, in verse 2 it says, I will leave but a sixth part of you. That's if you're using the King James, I will leave but a sixth part of you, but that phrase is not found in the Hebrew text. The fact is he'll destroy all of them and not even leave 1/6 of them. Now we come to point 5, the 3 results. Number 1, there will be a revival in the land in verses 7 and 8 because it's so obvious this was something only God can do that many Jewish people will come to faith. A second result in verses 9 and 10, because of so much destruction of military equipment, it will take 7 years of burning the equipment. It'll take them 7 years before all the equipment has finally been burned up and removed from existence. And then thirdly, in verses 11 through 16, there'll be so many dead, it'll take 7 months to get everybody buried. Initially, they'll be able to bury many, but there'll be people killed in certain crevices and so on that cannot be easily seen. And so people will be hired to travel and search out for 7 months where these dead bodies may be. They see one, put a marker on it, and then the burial detail can go out and bury the bodies. Now, in dealing with the timing of this event, you have to somehow fit in the 7 months of burial and the 7 years of burning. That's the key. That brings us a small d, the question of when. I listed you the different perspectives. One common view is that this invasion will take place at the midpoint of the 7-year tribulation. Now, the reason this does not quite fit is because we know from other passages that we shall see 2 weeks from today, at the midpoint of the tribulation, the modern state will collapse. There'll be one more forced exile from the land, and the Jews will have to flee the land, and the war to not even go inside a house to take any possessions from when, as soon as they hear about the abomination of desolation, to flee the land and to do so quickly. And therefore, there's no way, they don't have time to bury their own dead, let alone the invaders' dead, and so there's no room to fit in the 7 months of burial. Furthermore, the 7 years of burning would mean they'll have to continue burning for the first 3.5 years of the Messianic kingdom. But the Messianic kingdom is a brand new supernatural renovation of this earth. And all of the weapons of war are supernaturally removed. And there's no room for spending 3.5 years of the kingdom burying these weapons, and therefore this does not fit very well. The second view is to make it the end of tribulation to be part of Armageddon. But look at the details of Armageddon, details of this invasion. There are too many radical differences for them to be the one and the same. Here you have nations invading, and also you have nations protesting. But in Armageddon, it's all nations coming against the Jewish people to try to destroy them once and for all. Furthermore, you would also have to deal with the 7 months of burial, which will continue into the kingdom, and 7 years of burning into the kingdom. And again, the text simply does not allow for that to happen, because the millennial earth would be a totally newly renovated earth, requiring a supernatural renovation, removing all weapons of war and all things unclean, and a dead body exposed would render the land unclean. Then you have the interval view. In the interval view, they would say that this will happen between the end of tribulation and the start of the kingdom. Now, there is such an interval. There is such an interval. However, Daniel chapter 12, verses 11 through 13, Daniel 12, 11 through 13, limits the interval to 75 days. There'll be a 75-day interval between the end of tribulation and the start of the Messianic kingdom. Now, the 7 months of burial will require about 210 days. And it calls 7 years of burning into it, and so there's simply not enough time in the interval to cover these two events. Now, the fourth view is the post-millennial view. In the post-millennial view, they would say this is the same invasion as the one described in Revelation chapter 20. After Satan is released from the abyss, he again deceives the nations, and there's one more revolt against the authority of the Lord. That's not a good answer either, because what we know from Revelation is that following that invasion, when God destroys the invaders, he then does away with the universe as we've known it in Genesis chapters 1 and 2. He creates new heavens and a new earth. And therefore, you have a problem with both the 7 months of burial and 7 years of burning. Because it would mean they would have to bury for 7 months into the eternal order. Furthermore, Revelation 20 also teaches that the unsaved dead will be resurrected to stand before the great white throne judgment and be cast alive into the lake of fire. It would seem like a useless exercise to have to bury all these people for 7 months if God's going to resurrect them back to life to stand in that judgment. It just doesn't fit. Furthermore, a lot of the God creating a brand new earth for eternal stay, eternal order. Is he going to transfer all the weapons of war from this earth to the new one so we can burn the weapons for 7 years? No, that won't happen either. So I think that's one of the weaker views. I would say the best place to put it is put it sometime before the tribulation starts, minimally 3.5 years before the tribulation starts. It may happen 10, 20 years before the tribulation starts, but no later than 3.5 years before the tribulation starts. That leaves no problem with the 7 months of burial and no problem with the 7 years of burning. The burning ends by the mid-trib position when the Jews have to flee the land. And furthermore, people will often object to it, saying it shows that they're living in peace. But notice as you read the chapters, read it again if you haven't read it for a while, the word peace is never found here. It doesn't say they're living in peace, it says they're living in security. It's a Hebrew word that is used often in the context of war. It means to live confidently, to live securely, to be confident that you can repel any attack whatsoever. And this was confidence in the military has been quite evident. And furthermore, the description of Israel we see in chapter 38, verse 8, and chapter 38, verse 12, describes Israel as she exists at the present time. And so the description here is obvious of present-day Israel, and when the timing elements given in the chapter requires it to happen sometime before the tribulation, but no later than 3.5 years before the tribulation starts. So from the political standpoint, I see this to be the next major birth pang. The next major birth pang. Let's go to the book of Daniel, chapter 7, and we'll see 3 more birth pangs. Here Dan's given a vision of the future history of the 4 Gentile empires, focusing mostly on the 4th empire and the 5 different stages that the 4th empire undergoes. And now look at verse 23, chapter 7, verse 23. Thus he said, the 4th beast shall be a 4th kingdom upon earth, which shall be diverse from all the kingdoms, and shall devour the whole earth, shall tread it down and break it in pieces. As for 10 horns, out of this kingdom shall 10 kings arise, and others shall arise after them. He shall be diverse from the former, he shall put down 3 kings. Notice, first of all, he points out that eventually the 4th empire will devour the whole earth. Will devour the whole earth. Some tried to explain this, that Rome did conquer the whole known world, but that's not really true. Now, obviously, once you conquer to a certain point, you can see there's more out there. And furthermore, the Roman Empire never went as far east as the Greek Empire. Alexander's armies went all the way to the Indus River in India. The Roman Empire never extended that far to the east. Furthermore, what is now Scotland was part of the then known world, and the Romans could not defeat what was then the Proto-Scots. So Emperor Hadrian built the Hadrian's Wall to protect the Roman soldiers because they couldn't conquer that part of Scotland. And there was another empire in Rome's day called the Parthian Empire in the Middle East that Rome never fully conquered. So Rome never conquered the whole world or even the then known world. We take the text literally, there eventually being some kind of a one-world government. Some kind of one-world government. That will be the fifth birth pang. What kind of government there will be, we're not told. Whether there'll be a single ruler, collective ruler, we simply don't know. But then will come the next stage in verse 24, because eventually this one-world government will divide itself into 10 kingdoms, ruled by 10 men, 10 kings co-equally. Now we should notice that these 10 kingdoms will not be limited to Europe. They have to be worldwide, both East and West. And we have today over 180 different nations, but someday there'll be a restructuring of the world borders. And there'll be 10 Gentile nations plus Israel. It'd be more like North America becoming one country, South America a second one, Europe a third, Asia a fourth and a fifth, and others so on. It'd be something along those lines. And so there'll be 10 Gentile kingdoms plus Israel, and will be ruled by 10 men that are ruling the world co-equally over their specific kingdoms. And it's only after we have the 10 kingdom division, notice comes the next birth pang. And after them shall arise another one, a small one, which shall be diverse from the others. And that's capital G on your outline, the rise of the Antichrist. And he will rise to authority before the tribulation starts. Now he will not conquer the world until the middle of the tribulation. He'll rise to power before the tribulation starts, to become strong before the tribulation starts. At this point, he will be an 11th king coming up after the 10 kingdom division. And his rise to power will soon lead to the one event that will finally trigger the tribulation. Let's go back to Daniel chapter 9. But before that, let's go to 1 Thessalonians chapter 5. 1 Thess chapter 5. That would be the 8th birth pang, and then we'll see what the 9th one is. First Thess 5 verse 1. Because certain times and seasons wherein you have no need or be written unto you. For yourselves know perfectly the day of the Lord so comes as a thief in the night. When they are saying peace and safety, then sudden destruction comes upon them, as travail upon womb with child, and they shall no wise escape. The day of the Lord is the most common biblical phrase in both testaments, for we now simply call the tribulation. So the most common term we use is tribulation, great tribulation. The most common biblical term is the day of Jehovah, the day of the Lord. And he points out in verse 3, people say peace and safety, and suddenly the day of the Lord will hit. And so what that shows is there will be a period of peace and false security just before the tribulation starts. A period of peace and false security just before the tribulation starts. Now what will start the tribulation? Now we go to Daniel 9. We read verse 27 earlier, I won't read it again. Let me just notice the first phrase, and he shall make a firm covenant with many for 1 week. The pronoun he goes back to its nearest antecedent, which is in verse 26 as the prince that shall come. In other words, the prince that shall come in verse 26, and the he who makes a covenant in verse 27 is the one and the same individual. Better known now circus as simply the Antichrist. And he uses a definite article, the prince, because he spoke of him twice before in Daniel chapter 7 and Daniel chapter 8. The tribulation then begins with the signing of a 7-year covenant between Israel and the Antichrist. And when this covenant is signed, that will trigger the 7-year tribulation. And he points out that is three things. Notice that the covenant will be made with many, but not with all. There'll be a segment of the Jewish population that will not go along with this covenant. Secondly, although it is intended to continue for 7 years, it won't quite last as long. But in the middle of the 7, he will break it and take over the Jewish temple, signaling the beginnings of the abomination of desolation. And thirdly, the result of the breaking the covenant is desolation is now falling upon the Jewish people. Now, the covenant that will begin the tribulation is viewed by Daniel 9:27 is viewed from a human perspective. From a human viewpoint, it will be a 7-year treaty that will not last as long as it was intended to. But now turn to Isaiah 28, because Isaiah will give us God's perspective on this covenant that triggers that tribulation period. In Isaiah chapter 28, first of all, notice in verse 14 God's perspective on the many who make the covenant. Wherefore hear the word of Jehovah, ye scoffers, to all this people that is in Jerusalem. Notice he calls them scoffers or fools, and that's because of his perspective on the covenant in the very next verse, verse 15. Because ye have said, we made a covenant with death, and which shall are in agreement. And when the overflowing scourge shall pass through, it shall not come unto us. May lies our refuge, under falsehood have we hidden ourselves. Here we discover the actual reason why Israel bothers to make such a covenant. Now, one thing to note about biblical symbols is their consistency, in that one specific symbol will mean the same thing through both testaments in about 95% of the cases. There's a 5 percentile where a symbol could be used more than one way, but 95% is used the same way. For example, when the word star is used symbolically, it symbolizes an angel, good or bad. When the word stone is used symbolically, it symbolizes the Messiah. When the word mountain is used symbolically, it symbolizes a king or kingdom or throne. When the word cloud is used symbolically, it symbolizes God's Shekinah glory. And when the figure of a flood is used symbolically, it symbolizes a military invasion. That's the figure you see in the overflowing scourge here in verse 15. The word security is the most important single word in Israeli foreign policy. Israel, over her 60-plus years of existence, has had 4 major wars with the Arab states over Israel's security. The bombing of the Iraqi nuclear reactor had to do with Israeli security. The war with the PLO has to do with Israeli security, and the negotiations we see coming and going and coming always focus on the importance of Israeli security. And there's also the issue of the Prime Minister's speech just a couple of days ago in our Congress. But situations will arise in the future. They will come to feel the only hope they have of gaining this security is to make this covenant with the Antichrist. There's a common misconception that the Jewish people accept the Antichrist as the Messiah. That is nowhere taught in Scripture. They will not accept him as the Messiah. They have simply made a covenant with him that guarantees Israel's military security. They do not accept him as the Messiah itself. And because they put their trust in this covenant, is why God says this is a covenant not of life but of death, not of heaven but of hell. The same 3 things we just saw in Daniel 9:27 are found here. For example, in verse 16 we read of the non-many that refuse to have anything to do with the covenant, and these are the Jewish people that put their faith in the stone. And again, the word stone used symbolically refers to the Messiah. The Messianic Jews of that era would not go along with this covenant. Secondly, in Daniel 9:27, the covenant was eventually broken. The same thing happens here in verse 18. Your covenant with death shall be annulled, your agreement with Sheol will not stand, and when the overflowing scourge shall pass through, then you shall be trodden down by it. As in Daniel 9:27, so here, the covenant is broken, and in place of security, it will be insecurity. In place of comfort, it will be discomfort. And the picture of extreme discomfiture is illustrated in verses 19 and 20. Now skip down to verse 21. For Jehovah will rise up as in Mount Perazim, he brought him as in the valley of Gibeon, that he may do his work, his strange work, and bring to pass his act, his strange act. Now therefore be not scoffers, lest your bonds be made strong, for a decree of destruction have I heard from the Lord, Jehovah hosts upon the whole earth. There are many different names in Scripture for the tribulation. Here are two such names: Jehovah's strange work, Jehovah's strange act. It is both a strange work and a strange act because of the closing phrase of verse 22. God now issues a decree of destruction against the whole earth. So when Israel signs this 7-year covenant here on earth, in heaven, God will issue this decree of destruction. And this decree of destruction is the same as the 7-sealed scroll of Revelation chapters 5 and 6. And as each seal is broken, there is a massive destruction of the earth's surface and a massive destruction of the earth's population. By the time the 7 years have run their course, somewhere between 2/3 up to 3/4 of the earth's surface will be destroyed, and an equal percentage of the earth's population. But again, the destruction decree is issued as a result of the signing of the covenant, and this is the act that will actually trigger that 7-year tribulation. Now briefly, notice the list of events that will be happening in the pre-trib, but not enough information to know when before the pre-trib. Go down to capital C. We talked about the third temple. Notice there's a question mark. We know for sure the temple is standing at the midpoint, as we said. Midpoint of the 7 years, but we do not have enough information. So again, it might be rebuilt in the first half of the tribulation, but it's also a possibility it might be rebuilt in the first half, before the tribulation, as well as the first half. Only time will tell when this will happen. Now briefly, let's look at Joel chapter 2. Joel is the second minor prophet, Hosea, Joel. Joel chapter 2, verse 31. Joel chapter 2, verse 31. The sun shall be turned into darkness, and the moon to blood, before the great and terrible day of Jehovah come. Now again, the most common term for the tribulation in both testaments is the day of Jehovah, the day of the Lord. Always a time of divine wrath before the establishment of the Messianic kingdom. In chapter 3, the Messianic kingdom is introduced. But notice he mentions a blacking out of the sun and moon before the great and terrible day of Jehovah come. The Bible describes 5 major blackouts in the last days. There'll be 3 that will happen within the 7 years of tribulation. The last one will happen right after the tribulation, but there'll be one before the tribulation. Nothing to do with the present-day blood moons that people are talking about. This will be a very severe, that will include the redness of the moon, but also the blackness of the sun. That didn't happen last October, won't happen next October. So this is not what these sensational writers are talking about. But there will be a blackout when there is no light coming to the earth from the sun, moon, or stars. No light coming to the earth from the sun, moon, or stars. That will happen 5 times. This is one of these events before the tribulation starts. And now turn to the last minor prophet, the Italian one called Malachi. Malachi chapter 4, verse 5. Malachi 4, verse 5. Behold, I will send you Elijah the prophet before the great and terrible day of Jehovah come. He shall turn the heart of the fathers to the children, the heart of the children to the fathers, lest I come and smite the earth with a curse. And another event is the return of Elijah the prophet. He'll come before the tribulation starts. He'll have a special ministry aimed for the Jewish people. In Luke chapter 7, Jesus said, because of Israel's rejection, in place of bringing peace to the Jewish family, he brings division, father against son, mother against daughter, and so on. And so Jesus becomes a point of division. Now, the Jewish family unit is famous for being close-knit, and it is. But the one thing that immediately breaks that close-knitness is when a member of the family becomes a believer in Yeshua, in Jesus the Messiah. And that's what will bring on instantaneous division. And so Elijah's coming to deal with the Jewish people, to remove the stumbling block of Jesus, to be a point of division, setting the stage for Israel's national salvation, which is the prerequisite to the second coming of the Messiah. That's as far as we'll go with this tonight. Again, next week, we'll deal with another key event, which we'll spend the whole evening on, the study of the Rapture. We'll discuss who's involved, the event itself, and the timing of this event. And then that will complete this section, and then we'll focus more on Israel. When you came in, you received a folder like this. If you did not get one of these, would you just raise your hand? Anyone not get one of these? Get a few hands up if we can get past these brochures out. Okay, keep your hands up and he'll pass them out. And open the brochure all the way to the picture on it. Let me say a few words about Ariel Ministries. This is the only night I will take any time to do this. All the other Thursday nights will focus on the study of Scripture. But the word Ariel, the name of our ministry, is a Hebrew word meaning the Lion of God. And that tells you what we are. We are Jews who believe in the Messiahship of Yeshua, the Messiahship of Jesus, whom the Bible calls the Lion of the tribe of Judah. The ministry began back in 1977, and two principles we maintain to this day. And the first principle is to share the gospel with our Jewish people. And we do this by setting up branches in different Jewish pilot areas. We have several in the USA. Outside the USA, we have 9 other countries. We've established branches. We have a branch in Montreal and another branch setting up in Toronto, a third one soon to be established in Vancouver, for 3 altogether in Canada. Outside of the North America scene, we have branches in Red China, in India. We have branches in Australia, New Zealand, Russia, Ukraine, Germany, Hungary, and also finally in Israel itself, in the city of Netanya, where staff has been part of working with others, establishing a new congregation. And God has used our staff very effectively, and I'm glad to read the reports of our workers as they send in the reports telling us of how they came to faith, how they led Jewish people to faith. A second major purpose is to teach the Word of God intensively, as we did tonight. But being a Jewish ministry, especially focused on the Jewish background, Jewish frame of references, and Jewish usages of symbols and so on. And this teaching goes on in our various branches around the world. But we also teach through our books and tapes and manuscripts and so on. As you go after the service, as you go out to the foyer, you'll see a display table. On that table is one book available from Ariel Ministry, one copy of each book. And the one book that is most relevant to our studies on these 4 Thursdays is called The Footsteps of the Messiah. The Footsteps of the Messiah covers all the prophecies of both testaments, but puts the prophecies in sequence. You can tell in what order these prophecies will be fulfilled. I'll say more about the other books in subsequent Thursdays. Now, for the first, second, and Thursday, you will need to simply fill out an order form and order it that way. If you want to buy the book off the table, because of the last Thursday is my last meeting in Hawaii, so I don't need to hang on to them. So it'll be free to buy the books off the table, but you'll have to wait till last Thursday. You can go ahead and reserve them now, but you'll have to not take them until the final Thursday, so they'll be available to you that way. And we also have many other different teaching tools that we use. For example, we have a summer program we've had now for 40 summers, 41 coming up this summer, up in upstate New York in the beautiful Adirondack Mountains. We have a 6-week program divided into 3 different divisions. We have a 2-week curriculum, followed by a 3-week curriculum, followed by a 1-week curriculum. Now, the 2-week and 3-week curriculum have courses over a 5-year cycle, so to get everything we teach and offer, you'll have to come for 5 summers and then receive a certificate of completion. But the one course we teach every year, because of its importance, the life of the Messiah from a Jewish perspective. And we covered the 25-hour version of that study all in 1 week, 3 hours in the morning and 2 hours at night, Monday through Friday. And so it's a rather intensive period. On the back table, you'll see the copies of this camp brochure, Camp Shoshana. And then This will tell you the courses being offered this summer and who's teaching these various courses besides myself. If you come only for 1 week, you get a lot of material already for your own discipleship ministry. But if you can come for more than 1 week, for 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 weeks, you get that much more. So feel free to take one of these and see if you're free to come. You're more than welcome. And also you will receive, see these booklets. And what we're starting this coming September is a 1-year program, academic year, meaning September till May, of a special school called the Ariel School of Messianic Jewish Studies. And it'll be just a basically 9-month program, so it'll be a new student body every year. And you can finish a major in Messianic Jewish Studies in that 9-month period. So if you think you might want to attend for that 1 year or know other people that might attend, just help yourself to one of these and I'll give you the information. For the first 2 years, we're going to limit our student body to 25 students and then let it grow from then after that. But the first 2 years, we want to keep it small to make sure we get everything organized well. So these are the various facets of our ministry. Now, if you look inside the brochure, you'll see a page where it says My Commitment on it. This outlines different ways you can join us in this work as a co-worker. It begins with the phrase, I do indeed select myself to commit to love you for, number 1, to pray for the salvation of Jewish people. You may know Jewish people. There are about 7,000 to 10,000 who live here in Oahu. And you may know Jewish people, past, present, as friends, neighbors, workmates, schoolmates. If so, I encourage you to pray for their salvation by name. It's a prayer God's answered many times over. Second, do what I can to give them the good news. Now, if you're a Gentile believer and you have Jewish acquaintances, see what you can do to get the gospel out to them, and the 2 very good tools you can use. The first tool is simply using your own testimony. Here's why this is important. When we grow up in the Jewish community, we do not distinguish between Gentiles and Christians. We are led to believe these are synonymous terms in a place like America. So you're not born a Jew, that makes you a Gentile. That part is true, but we also come to think automatically that makes you a Christian. And of course, that is not true. So growing up, I came to believe that Hitler, Mussolini, the Pope, Billy Graham, and the Dallas Cowboys are all Christians and all Gentiles at the same time. At the Dallas Cowboys, for a specific reason, among the Jewish people, the game of football is viewed to be purely a Gentile game. It would not be very Jewish running around a field chasing after a pigskin. So the importance of the testimony is to distinguish between what a Gentile is, what a Christian is, because till a Jewish person realizes the difference, and you have to believe something to become a Christian, not to be born something, only then will he consider the possibility to consider the claims of the Messiah. Now also, Ariel Ministries publishes a packet called the Jewish Packet, comprising about 4 or 5 small pamphlets that respond to Jewish objections to the Messiahship of Jesus. And I would recommend, if you have Jewish acquaintances, to contact our office either by mail, email, or phone call. Ask for a Jewish packet. If you have 2 or 3 or 4 Jewish acquaintances, ask for 2 or 3 or 4 Jewish packets. We'll mail them to you free of charge. We don't want finances to be a stumbling block to getting the gospel out to Jewish people, and then give them to your Jewish contact and see what God may do. Over the years, we'll also discover that many Gentile believers that have Jewish acquaintances but won't give them a gospel literature or share the gospel with them because they're afraid of a negative response, which often does take place. So because of that fear factor, they won't do that. Now, if you're in that category, here's what I recommend you can do. Get a hold of our Jewish packet anyway, put it inside an envelope, and mail it to your Jewish contact without giving your own name or address away. In our ministry, we call this approach chicken evangelism. But it's been known to work, and over the years I've met Jewish believers who became believers because someone submitted to just that way. If you won't do it any other way, go ahead and try chicken evangelism, because God can use it. If you're afraid they might know where it came from because of the postmark, if you live here in Kaneohe, skip over to Honolulu or Wahiawa, mail it from there. Or if you live over there, come over here and mail it. And this way we can hide your identity and still get the gospel out that way. Now, thirdly, to pray for the work of Ariel Ministries, we do have a special prayer booklet, and I'll say more about that a week from today, where a lot of different branches send us their answered prayer and then new prayers they ask people to pray for them. And for me to go from page to page, you'll read about a different branch and their prayer requests, and I'll say more about that next week. And one more way you can participate with is to make a monetary commitment of so much for the next number of months of years. Ariel itself is an independent faith ministry. Only about 20% of our support comes to local churches, but 80% comes from individual believers that God has led to support the ministry more regularly. So between now and the last Thursday, you might make this a matter of prayer if God will so move you. If so, mark the amount by the $sign. Let us know for how many months or years. Tear the slip off. You can drop it in the back table where the literature is, and in the offering box in the back, and that'll be sufficient. If you make a monetary commitment, simply wait until you hear from us. We will let you know by letter when to mail it in, and that'll be the only time you will hear about this from us. We do not send out appeal letters and things of that nature or reminders. We simply feel it's between you and the Lord. If God does supply the amount, to mail it in, but if not, you won't. But you will not be badgered by mailings and appeals from us whatsoever. So on this, you simply do as you feel the Lord leading to do. Now, if you wish to give anything on these Thursdays, you want to receive a receipt, mark the amount you're giving on one of these Thursdays in the upper left-hand corner for how much you're giving, and then just drop it into the offering box in the back. We're happy to send you a number receipt for income tax records. One last thing before we take our questions. We also publish our teachings in a quarterly magazine. Looks like this, the Ariel magazine. On one hand, it contains news of our branches in these 10 different countries, but also always contains 2, usually 3 Bible studies from the same Messianic Jewish perspective. And you want to receive it, and the first 4 issues we give you free of charge. After that, you can decide whether you wish to subscribe to it. It'll be free for the first 4 editions. If you want to receive the hard copy like this, just give us your full address on the slip. If you want it as an email, give us your email address on the slip, and that will be sufficient. All right, let's take if we can have the microphone. I have questions that came in written forms. Let me deal with these first, and then we'll take the questions from the floor. Do you have a timeline of the sequence of pre-tribulation events as found in chapter 4 of Footsteps, starting World War I and World War II until signing the covenant? The Bible gives us in sequential order, but does not tell us how long it is between different steps. Just doesn't say. So we have no way to give a timeline. For example, 19 years passed between the second birth pang, Israel becoming a state, and the third one, Israel taking Jerusalem. 19 years passed before that happened. So we just don't have a time element between these birth pangs, only the order of it, so there's no way to know. In terms of politics and leadership, there is evidence in Scripture that God has been displeased with choices of leadership at times. Much of the suffering on earth is because of godless leadership. Scriptures gives Christian instructions to obey legitimate authority unless it contradicts the Lord's commandments. That's all correct. When Paul wrote Romans chapter 13 about obeying the government, what kind of government do they have? Autocracy, the Roman government. And it was a rather horrendous form of government, but it was a government that believers had to submit to. But God was displeased, is obvious, because in the reference to the passage, Hosea chapter 8, verse 4, is referring to the kings of the northern kingdom. And while the prerequisite for kingship in the south was to be of the house of David, kingship for the north had to require prophetic sanction or divine appointment. Anyone that didn't have would end up being assassinated. So God told Jehu, for example, his house or dynasty will get to rule Samaria, Israel, for 4 generations. And 4 generations did. When the 5th one tried to gain a throne, he was assassinated. He didn't have prophetic sanction or divine appointment. All of these kings of Israel, even by divine appointment, were wicked kings. But keep in mind, ultimately, who rules any government, whether it's ours or some other government, God is God's determination. And Daniel chapter 4 says God raises up kings, he puts down kings, he even says he even has the basest of men to sit on thrones. even as the basest of men to sit on thrones. That's why sometimes the Democrats win. And sometimes leaders are chosen to bless the country, sometimes leaders are chosen to discipline the country. It works both ways. The scripture reveals what believers will be doing between the rapture and the second coming. They'll obviously have to, since they missed the rapture, they'll have to make preparations, because believers will know that they have to develop passages for hiding and things of that nature, just as Jews knew when Nazis captured Poland to go into hiding. Many Jews did, and the same thing will happen with these believers. They have to learn to hide and so on, but it'll be difficult, and many will be martyred, but many will survive because of their ability to stay hidden. All right, take the questions from the floor. Who's got the first question today?
Raise your hand and I'll come to you.
A couple, Doctor. My name is Marie. When you talked about first stage, the invasion of the Northern Alliance, you identified Somalia with Libya?
No, so the key word is put, and some people render put to be Libya, but in Hebrew, Libya is lub. Put is Somalia. It shouldn't be Libya, it should be Somalia.
Okay. And you did mention Ethiopia.
Yeah, Cush was said, my text gives you the actual Hebrew rendering. Cush is today Ethiopia.
Okay. Out of all of those that we've talked about too in church, Ethiopia is really the only one that I don't see doing much of anything, causing world trouble, except something about water in the Nile, blocking the Nile, but I don't see them.
Well, don't go by current events now. When this invasion takes place, things will be different.
Yeah.
You got to put it.
I'm just waiting for them to do something. I think that's it. I want this to move along. I think that's what it is.
Well, keep tuned to Fox News.
I'll get some story. Oh yeah, and about the building of the temple.
Yes.
It doesn't have to be on the map, right?
Yes, it does.
It does?
Yes. If they could build it anywhere else, then it would have been built by now.
Well, yeah, but I know they're gathering stuff.
They're gathering stuff with the intent of building on the mount. That's the goal. Way in the back. Just maybe throw it.
Do you think current Russia under Putin has a part to play?
At this point, we would have to say we don't know yet. Again, stay away from current events. Bible prophecy is never fulfilled approximately, it's always fulfilled precisely to the letter. And whether Putin plays any role, only time will tell. Maybe he'll be part of this, maybe he's the Gog, I don't know. At this point, we cannot say what he will do.
It does seem like Persia and Russia have an alliance, and Putin made an appearance in Tehran.
But that does not prove that he's the Gog of Ezekiel 38. That does not prove he's the Gog of Ezekiel 38. Okay?
Thank you. Next.
Any other questions? Over here.
There's always a contention among many nations concerning the settlements that continue to be built in Israel. Why does Israel continue to do these settlements?
Because in the Israeli view, the Zionist view is that this is the land God gave them, and they're responsible to settle the promised land. And so they're not just removing Arab settlements. The Arab settlements have been there for centuries; they're still there, but they have settled in the what was then government-owned land under Jordan, which fell under Israeli authority. The point of settlements is for Jewish settlement in the promised land, and that's the Zionist goal, and biblically that's their land. That is their land.
Dr. Fruchtenbaum,
a total of 9 birth pangs in sequence.
So are you seeing that we're probably on the fourth birth pang now?
Waiting for the 4th birth pang. But I'm seeing the other ones are also birth pangs. We just don't know where to fit them. Like the blackout and the return of Elijah. We don't have enough information when before the tribulation we have to fit them in. So these are all birth pangs, but we can put 9 of these in sequence.
Is this return of Elijah the same thing as the prophets of the Wailing Wall?
Say it again now?
Is this the return of Elijah the same concept as the prophets of the Wailing Wall?
Well, many people connect Elijah to be one of those 2 prophets, but there's no reason to do that. There's nothing in the context to imply, yes, Elijah's coming back. But if you look at the transfiguration account in Luke chapter 9, it clearly says Elijah appeared with him in glory. So he's already glorified. A glorified body cannot die. And those 2 witnesses do die. So these 2 witnesses will be 2 Jewish men that God will choose for that function. Everybody else in Revelation is future. There's no need to make the 2 witnesses historical people. So that I don't think that Moses and Elijah or Enoch and Elijah is indeed coming back onto Malachi. But the 2 witnesses will be 2 Jewish men living at that point of time that God will choose for that purpose. Question?
Why do you guys make me go back and forth?
Hi, Doctor. I was just wondering about the young lions in America. Is America part of the young lions?
If the Tarshish was Britain, then that would be yes. But if you go by the way Ezekiel himself uses Tarshish throughout his book, it has to be Spain. So this is hard for Americans to accept, but God did not consider the USA important enough to mention anywhere in Scripture. And the US plays no mention role in Bible prophecy. I might point out that when the first George Bush was elected, there's a lot of fear and trepidation in Israel. Because the last time the Jews listened to someone by the name of Bush, they got lost in the desert for 40 years. They got over it.
Okay. Anyone else? Okay.
Way in the back again.
I'm starting to take this personally. I just want to
All the information you have given us tonight,
Yeah.
all the information you give us tonight, it's so many things that for me, I don't even really understand. And I don't think in my lifetime I'm ever going to understand all this. What would be your fitting word for the body of Christ? Word of encouragement for us today?
The word of encouragement is to study the whole Bible so that you can understand these things. The whole Word of God. God did not say just study what you like or what's relevant to you. He says, this is my word. You're responsible to know it as a whole. Yes, and so on. Nothing much in Leviticus is relevant to us, but there's spiritual truths there, like the means of atonement can only be done by blood and so on. So we can learn a lot from Leviticus, though we wouldn't actually practice all Leviticus tells us to practice, because it's limited for the Jewish people under the Mosaic law. So study the Word. That's for, and that'll encourage you just by itself. Take 5 more minutes. Any?
You addressed what believers will be doing between the rapture and the second coming, who are still on earth. What will the saints be doing who were raptured between the rapture and the second coming?
Well, one thing that will happen, we know for sure, is the judgment seat of the Messiah in 1 Corinthians 3, verses 10 through 15. Each of us will give an evaluation, be evaluated how we served the Lord. All the wood, hay, stubble will be burned off. All the gold, silver, precious stone will be purified. And our place in the kingdom will determine how much of the gold, silver, precious stone that we have. And then at the end of all that, just before the second coming, we'll participate in our own wedding. In Revelation chapter 19, verses 6 to 8, the wedding takes place in heaven just before the second coming. And so, and then when the tribulation judgments are poured out, we'll be watching the events up in heaven as these different angels pour out, break the seals, or pour out the bowls, or sound the trumpets, for example. That much we know will be involved to some degree. But the judgment seat will take some time because of so many individual members in the body, in the bride. Okay, 3 more minutes. Question?
It's okay if you're in the back.
All right, then, let me tell you a short story and a long one. The short one is a rabbi who's been wanting to win the lottery because he had a small synagogue, wasn't paid well. So at the end of each week, he doesn't win, and he goes into mourning and says, Lord, please, please let me win the lottery. Another week passes. Please, please, Lord, let me win the lottery. It's been for a long time, and finally he didn't win again. So finally he says, Lord, can't you give me a break and let me win the lottery? He hears a voice from heaven saying, and God says, why don't you give me a break and at least buy a ticket? The story, second one's not a rabbi story, but has a Jewish connection. A story about a Taliban terrorist wandering through the desert, and he's fleeing the authorities. He's run out of water. He's getting desperate. Looks out in the distance, and he sees what looks like an oasis. Every oasis has water, so he tries to make it to the oasis. When he finally gets there, he doesn't see any oasis. There's no water there. Just an old Jewish man selling ties. The terrorist asked the rabbi, "Don't you have any water here?" The Jewish man says, "I have no water. I have all these nice ties, only $5 American a piece." He says, "I don't want these Western clothing. I'm from the East, and I need some water." And the Jewish man says, "Like I said, I have no water. I've got this nice silk tie, only $5 American. And the terrorist says, "I wish I had the strength right now to take this tie and put it around your neck and kill you. I hate Jews. I wanted to kill Jews since I was a child. We need to preserve humanity. We need to find some water." The Jewish man says, "I'll show you I'm a better man than you are. You won't, you call me, you hate me because I'm Jewish. You call me a heretic, an infidel. You won't buy any of my ties, but I'll show you I'm a better man than you are. If you can make it for 1 more kilometer through the sand dunes, you'll come to a crossroads. On the crossroads, there's a nice restaurant, has all the water you could possibly want to drink. So go in peace and may God bless you." The terrorist walks away, says, "I may come back and kill you yet, but right now I need to reserve my energy." Disappears for a while. After a while, he comes back. He's crawling on his knees. He's crawling on his hands. He's almost dead. He's got this $5 bill in his hand, and he says, "They won't let me in without a tie." More next week.